Where do you draw the line between a snack and a meal?
Oh, that's a good question.
What a good answer.
Alternately, I think greetings to everyone who's online. We're just broadcasting now. We had 2 people who said they're going to join us in a few minutes. There's no one on yet. Well, I'll start and give an example. I think a meal has to involve at least one other person. I'm Sam Klein, and I was just in Mexico City, and we had an insect meal, which was mainly crickets.
So there were short crickets?
Yes.
You mean they didn't give you too many? You only allowed to have one? Is that why it made it shortest?
No, it was actually there was a lot of insects.
What do they taste like? They're really tasty.
They're very tasty.
They're called chapulines.
Yeah.
Chapulines, and you can get them rolled in chili or in chocolate.
They taste like small chips.
Yeah.
They're salty and crunchy.
They're really very popular. I don't like.
I cannot top that. I cannot top that. But I will tell you that my name is Judy Perlman. At this point, I live alone, so I have lots of meals alone. I would say probably the shortest.
No, you can't have his definition is you have to have involve one other person.
Okay, shortest meal with another person. Is that a definitional thing?
Yes.
Or is that, okay.
Physically,
like
a cricket.
Eating corn on the cob over the sink with my daughters, late for the ferry. Just got to get some food in.
Great.
Over Memorial Day. Okay.
Drinking water with a friend at Boy Scout camp.
Low calorie meal.
Very.
It was mineral water.
And what's your name for people who haven't met you?
I'm David.
Joe, probably some pretentious appetizer in Paris.
What kind of fish appetizer?
Huh?
What kind of fish?
Some kind of liver thing. They're all liver things.
A bird liver.
Yeah, bird thing, they're chicken things, duck things.
Welcome, Joe.
I'm Rob Moyer, and my shortest meal was sharing a can of sardines with peanut butter and crackers.
That's a good meal.
Well, my name is Faith Girdler, and probably they are pretty small. I've actually eaten guinea pig, which is very popular in the highlands of Cuy. Yes, okay. But I've also had, as you know, chapulines, which are actually pretty yummy. I personally prefer the chocolate ones, not the chili ones.
I'm Mark Tomizawa, so I was coding in 67 or 68 as a high school student. So I had many quick meals that were bad microwave sandwiches or bad like chili out of a can because we couldn't wait to get back to the keyboard.
I'm Ezra Glenn. I guess I think I kind of graze more throughout the entire day rather than actual things that look like meals. But I do see a lot of movies, and sometimes before we do a movie, I'll like to hold some actual real food so you don't have to bring it in. It's true.
Arno Vered, I recall being in the foothills in Belize and being approached by a Maya native, and I had a very small backpack, but he wanted to know what was in it because he'd never seen an outsider before. So I took out a can of orange juice, took my machete, sliced the top off, and split it with him. And we kind of became friends.
I
think my shortest meal was standing in St. Petersburg at a stand eating zakuski. That was
Appetizers.
What is that?
Appetizers.
appetizers. A whole bunch of
The
them.
question is so interesting, people are forgetting to say their names.
Yes, it takes so much work.
So,
My name's Anne Ryan, thank you.
Which zakuski did you have?
I had, I ate a cherry one first, so I had quite a few. But then I had some lovely meat ones.
You're talking about pirogi, not zakuski.
Okay.
Whoa.
Sorry.
We'll make
No, I
corrections.
have,
That's fine.
yes.
Hi, my name is Alfredo and I just arrived and I don't know what. the
Shortest
question
meal
was.
you ever had?
Shortest?
Yes.
Meal.
It's the
This
definition of the
afternoon.
meals. You have to share it with another meal.
You mean physically small, you don't mean like the shortest time you spent.
Oh yeah, that's what was the question.
Eating, right?
Shortest time, but there's often a relation.
Yeah, the shortest time, I mean, because,
With the shortest
It
person.
has to be shared at least with one person.
This afternoon for sure. Fast and small.
exactly.
So what was it?
Pizza.
Okay.
It was good.
So I'm near young, of course, the shortest meal is a fast, so. that's the
Oh.
answer. Oh.
Group fast.
I'm Joe, postdoc here at NECSI.
Hey, Joe.
A couple months ago, I shared a bag of chips in the car actually with Alfredo while we were evacuating my roommate's cat.
What happened to the
Evacuating?
cat?
Yeah.
What was wrong with the cat?
Oh no, the cat was fine. Something wrong with the landlord.
Should have evacuated the landlord.
That would have been preferable for sure.
Legally tenuous.
My name is Marina, and I assume that it has to be at least more than a 0, so I'm not sure that fast would be it.
Well, no repetition.
Right, I'm not repeating it. So I think I can top you because my daughter is a food artist, and one of her projects was ghost food, where you would have a device that would smell like chocolate, and you would drink regular milk and it would taste like chocolate milk, or you would eat vanilla ice cream and think that you're eating chocolate ice cream, or you would eat tofu and it would smell like cod and you think you're eating codfish. It's called ghost food.
How
Google
did
it.
this work?
Nice.
Just go Google it, you'll see GHOST. It's called ghost food. It works because most of our senses, most the way we as a humans detect food is through the smell.
Well, it's not, yeah. I read an article in the New Yorker about that,
She's been around.
and how.
She's been on CNN.
But apparently, scientists, I mean, and they are called scientists, they're chemists. It's really very complex how the smell works. And in the article in the New Yorker, they talked about like sour cream and onion potato chips. Like the chemicals they put together to put on potato chips to make you think you're eating a sour cream and onion potato chip. And of course, it has something to do with, sour cream or onions. It's all chemicals.
Well, and we now have a laboratory near here that only produces air foods, or that mainly produces air foods. Have you been to this place?
I think that's where she got the smells.
Oh, nice.
Air.
Le
Yeah,
Laboratoire. It's very it was in Paris, and the person who ran it is a professor and came to Boston, and now they have Café Haute Science in Le Laboratoire, and it's in some of the large office buildings out by MIT.
Yeah, I think it's 650 candle.
Yeah.
Street.
So HVAC and you feel full.
I don't know about feeling full.
Yeah, it's
That's right.
mostly
You worry
the
about
hungry.
the,
Actual, yes,
right.
yeah. These are fabricated social problems.
Is that air food or air fruit?
Air food.
Air food.
Right. So back in the world of actual food and lodging, we had a nice chat a couple of weeks ago. About half of you were there. We started talking about homelessness, mainly in the U.S., and how it's being perceived and responded to. And for anyone who has a computer, we took some notes on a hack pad. And I'm taking notes again today for our conversation.
Is there a network key, by the way?
A network key.
He's talking about the password.
Easily repeatable.
Yeah,
Sorry to interrupt.
why don't you keep going for?
Yeah, I'll take notes. And if you want a network, you can ask Joe or Yenir.
Yeah, I can send it over. Oh, please.
Great. So one of the takeaways at the end of our last conversation, we were talking about how Cambridge has been dealing with these things. We talked about a few examples in different cities, and Cambridge has been thinking about new initiatives starting in the fall, and they organized a public meeting this summer. And some of us were talking about how we could focus the conversation on a group that was trying to make some local change. So perhaps we can talk specifically about that for a little bit. I'd love to hear from the new people just a little bit about your experiences with homelessness and what you'd like to get out of the conversation. And then we can talk more specifically about the projects that people have in mind in the next month. So,
Am I a new person?
why don't we start with you as a new
Okay, so I'm
person?
a new person.
Yes.
You were gesturing, it's glaring. So I'm Ezra Glenn. I work over at MIT in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning. And prior to that, I actually worked at the local level in Somerville and in Lawrence as a city planner. So a lot of my experience with homelessness is either working with agencies who are trying to somehow address it or funding certain programs. So I think I was curious to see what the sort of complex systems institute approach was to this, because I could imagine ways. My experience was largely on some debates in the policy as to whether, is this primarily a housing problem and we need to build more shelter, and it's simply supply demand, we don't have enough supply. And I think in a place like Massachusetts, you can make some good arguments for that. Or is it more an issue about, well, the poor, you'll always have people with you, and certain people don't fit the traditional models of housing. We need to address the people, not the supply. And you sort of see both of those out there. At times you'll build lots of housing and try to get people in there, and they, can't keep paying the rent, or can't, their life is not stable. So then other people say, well, we got to stabilize their life, get people clean, sober, in a job, whatever. But that can be really hard to do without a house. So you kind of go back and forth and chase your tail around that. And that's what the policymakers do in terms of where should they put the money, because of course they can't just come up with more money and cut the circle in every place. So they have to decide, well, where are we going to try this? So that, and then the other piece I guess that I would throw out there that might be neat to talk about is just a question of measurement. How do we know what this thing is we're studying in order to try to approach a problem? You want to be able to somehow define it, somehow measure it, somehow know how bad is it, where is it bad, and when is it getting better, and that can be really hard with it. People have this naive idea of homelessness that really doesn't capture the full extent of all the different ways people could be underhoused or partially housed, or in and out of shelter, or shuffled around, or at risk, or all these sort of options. Has anybody actually participated in a homeless census, where you go around and you count?
I believe HUD does that
Every year.
Yeah,
And
and from what I've been told by some advocates, in many places, these numbers are understated by a factor of about 2 to 1.
Yeah, it's a weird experience, because you go around and you have to feel really excited every time you find a homeless person. You're really happy to find, because then the numbers will represent what you think is the true extent of the problem, and you'll qualify for more money than some other place. It's there's even big debates about should you go count in the winter or in the summer, because homeless populations shift around. So those are some ideas.
Great, thanks, Ezra. Would you like to go next?
No, somebody else go.
I'm another newbie. I used to be, for years, I was on the board of the Homeless Coalition in Salon. And I'm sorry, what's your name? Joe. Joe? Yeah. And I'm now on lots of committees dealing with housing and housing improvements, just sustainability, et cetera, et cetera. As a matter of fact, I have to leave by 6 for a meeting at 6 for one. And my focus, and also I ran across in the course of some of that committee stuff, the hard number that there are 73 homeless high school kids in Somerville, which they discovered sort of randomly, living on couches and cars. God knows if it's still 73. It was 73 as of this spring.
7,300?
No,
73. Yeah.
73. Somerville's small.
High school students.
High school
Yeah,
students. Yeah. Somerville's very small. Somerville's also very dense. I mean, it's the second densest city, third or fourth densest city in the country.
What's the most dense city in the country?
Well, it used to be 110,000 people in 4 square miles. Now it's 78,000 people.
Which city is the most dense?
I don't know.
I think it's part of Brooklyn.
Probably.
I mean, the problem is that Somerville's a whole city.
Yeah.
And Brooklyn has got different parts to it. But after after World War II, Somerville was second only to Calcutta. Most people didn't persevere.
And that's what makes Somerville so interesting to do research in, because frankly, it's a laboratory by definition.
So my name is Rob, and I live in Somerville and I work in Cambridge. And I'm into participatory systems thinking. So I'm here not because I'm an expert on homelessness, but because I'm intrigued about how we, have a single problem, homelessness, and yet it's being fed by so many different factors. And so that means that there are many opportunities for people to have different roles in addressing the problem. And that's what I do with my environmental work as well. So I'm interested in how we identify the factors and really show the things that there's a
including some of the mapping questions.
I'm going to jump in and say that I am ostensibly an expert in homelessness. I work for an organization that receives funds from HUD, and then they send me out to places that are having a hard time using HUD funds properly to do homelessness and housing related activities. So I'm kind of a fix-it person. I have these teams that we do this. It's a very, very, very complicated issue. So I'm really grounded for 30 years in homelessness, very interested to understand what the rest of y'all are doing. But I mean, with the systems thinking, because it's absolutely interorganizational and cross-sector, and that's the only way that these changes are really happening is through slow cross work. And I would say, you talked about measurement. It's a big issue, actually. Homelessness in HUD, these programs are actually getting level funded or increased in funding because this group is doing a lot of analysis. And they're using data to drive reallocation, all kinds of things at the local level. It's very suspect in a lot of ways, but we're doing more in homelessness with data than in other parts of HUD. So that's an interesting finding. I mean, it's an interesting experience because we know how funky these numbers are.
Excuse me, your name again?
Judy Perman. And I would also say I'm here because I work in my house. I've been living in Cambridge for a long time. I work nationally. I work in Flint and Detroit, Michigan. I work in Baltimore. And I'm really interested in kind of reestablishing more local connections. I stopped working for a nonprofit in about 6 years ago in Malden. So I was very plugged into Massachusetts homelessness stuff and Cambridge homelessness stuff. So I'm very curious to know what the content is that you said is coming up for this fall initiative when you have a chance to put that out.
Yeah. But I don't think we've recruited anyone from the Cambridge effort to come to one of these events yet. But we were talking a couple weeks ago that they had started announcing that.
You're still like to say a few words?
Well, yeah, my name is Faith Girdler. I don't have any real specific connection to homelessness, but I have done a lot of social justice work in South America. That's why I've eaten koi, the guinea pig. There's a volunteer school for homeless kids, and I've been going down for many years to help with that. And it is amazing. It is truly amazing to me how, these kids who, well, some of them are homeless. They do live in the streets, but other ones, they might as well be homeless because, of course, indigenous families in the Andes have, 15 kids in the family. It's really common, or 10 or whatever. And of course, the parents can't take care of all 15. It's ridiculous. So the kids technically have a place to sleep, but they, their parents can't even keep track of when they're coming and going. So, but we have a school for homeless kids or kids who have been abandoned or mistreated or whatever. And it is so amazing. It really renews my faith in human nature every time when I go there. And I see how loving they are. They're so loving and they're so, adorable. They just, every morning when we come in, they just jump into our arms and like, oh, look, Professor, like, mwah, mwah, and it's also fascinating to me because I've taught in public schools here for, over a decade. And you know how it is here. You touch a kid and it's like, whoa, lawsuit, you know what I mean? And, and then, but down there, our director, Yuri, told us, he said like, look, these kids need to be hugged. They need to be picked up and played with. And, we have all ages. We have, I suppose the youngest, we have, it's like 5, I guess, 5, 6, 5 or 6. Then we have up until 14, I would say. Sometimes, when they get to be 14, they're a little too old to be in our program, but we use them to take care of the little kids too. So that's why there are some kids that we should, frankly, they shouldn't be in our program, but we know that they are good at taking care of the kids who are really squirrely. Let me tell you. But it's adorable.
And do you coordinate with other housing projects for kids?
Well, yeah, I have worked here for many years as well. I work for the Bell Foundation, which stands for Building Educated Leaders for Life. That's basically in Rochester, and that is finding, kids, Boston public school kids, who have been identified by their teacher at performing at or below grade level, and we work with them to bring their test scores up by bringing their self-esteem up. And that's why we present strong Black Latino images to them. Our founder, Earl Martin Phelan, who went to Harvard, this was in the early 90s actually, and came across, 2 kids, four kids playing basketball at Harvard. And Earl and his friends wanted to play, but they said, no, that's okay, we'll wait. But then he discovered, Earl and his friends discovered these kids. They were 14 years old and they didn't know how to read. Okay, seriously, 14 years old, you don't know how to read, and he was just horrified by this. And that's why he started the Bell Foundation, where kids from the community, can come and see role models. And Earl was very specific about not using rap stars, not using sports stars, because that is just, a pipe dream. That's just too, the chances of them getting out of, the hood and getting to be a sports star or a rap star, which isn't the most positive model anyway. So he wants us to use people in the community, educators, doctors, engineers, policemen, things like that. And
That seems to get to the.
What's that? Yeah, he did. We did start with elementary school, and that was our main focus for many, many years. But they have recently, like last year, they just started moving to middle school because that's where federal funding is going, is to middle school.
But now this isn't housing and homelessness funding. This is.
But it is working with inner city kids, and a lot of these kids are being dragged through crazy things because of the parents being split up or not having not knowing which parents they're going to be with, because a lot of times the fathers aren't there at all in the city. A lot of times it's the mother, the grandmother, the boyfriend, so it's like, it is a home, but it's not a real stable home.
Thanks. So Judy, we did mention, to your question about how cities are actually addressing this, we talked a little bit last time about the federal effort to at least label all the funds that are going to homelessness, which helps to avoid some of the fuzziness at the edges between all the different development
So
plans.
but just to say why I'm just interested in social justice issues, okay? In case you're wondering.
Yes.
I'm really interested in social justice issues.
Great.
So, and homelessness is certainly a huge problem.
We have a new person.
Welcome.
Hi, introduce yourself. I'm Fred Berman. I live in Somerville. I work for the National Center on Family Homelessness, which actually is now part of the American Institutes for Research. And for a bunch of years, I worked for the City of Cambridge coordinating planning for homelessness.
What do you do in Cambridge? What was Cambridge's work
I
in that area
worked
like?
for the Services Department, and we administered a lot of funds from HUD and other sources and we had planning process. We allocated those funds, oversaw the use of those funds, and we ran our own homelessness-related services out of the multi-service center.
Very cool. Let me maybe, we're going to have open conversation. There were people who were here last week that didn't speak yet really, and people just introduced themselves. I want to take a few minutes to say a few words about sort of background in complex systems and also sort of frame what we're here for in this context. So first, as a matter of background, there are complex systems, the approaches to dealing with them and understanding them there are many, but in this context, maybe a good way to start is to say, there are going to be large forces that affect homelessness. Things like whether it's minimum wage, for example, or other economic factors that like housing costs and so on, that are that run across the entire system and are affecting many people in some way. And I don't know that any analysis has really been done that I've seen that really addresses, even at the coarse scale, how the large factors are affecting homelessness. I think that would be important to do. It hasn't been done, we have not done it, but that's a key piece of understanding the nature of the forces that are existing in the system that act on people in this context. But one of the factors that is affecting things that is relevant from our perspective is technically the complexity of society. So the challenge that is presented to an individual as part of the need to fit into society as a whole. That's something that is a little bit more abstract than something like housing costs. The flip side of the conversation from the point of view of complex system science is the complexity of what is happening. And this is what Ezra raised earlier. The question is, can you address this by housing stock, or you have to address the people, which really meant all of the many different dimensions of what are affecting individuals. And we did talk about that a little bit last time when we were here, that at the individual level where the problems are happening, the diversity of the conditions that are present, that are individually specific, though they may have common themes across many individuals, such as health-related issues or substance abuse or lack of employment or employability or other things, that they represent many dimensions that are self-consistently creating a condition that involves many of these dimensions, but in order to address it requires very specific individually related interventions. Now, one of the principles that we've derived, if you like, mathematically from complex system science is that dealing with highly individual specific problems, which are complex in a technical sense, cannot be effectively done by centrally managed organizations. So the entire question about what are the effective organizations to deal with such problems has to be part of the discussion. What we have been trying to do in general is, from a scientific perspective, to analyze the large-scale issues that I talked about at first, and to motivate conversations about and hopefully eventually facilitate the creation of organizations that are distributed and controlled, use diverse methods and interdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary understanding to address complex problems. The purpose of these meetings is, in fact, to reach out, to create a beginning of dialogue that is particularly, if you will, focused on the latter, so that we can begin to foster the distributed activities that are eventually going to be necessary to address these kinds of complex problems, i.e. particularly in this case, homelessness. That's the thing.
Thanks, Amir.
You've got a few activities to foster.
Yeah. Now, I think this, just to go back, I think this particular session is really trying to think about first steps in action. If there are many things that we have to do, surely that's the case. Where do we start? And I'm very pleased that there are both experts and many people who have concerns about the homeless situation, as well as other societal problems, because eventually homelessness is not decoupled from other societal problems, but is really embedded in them. And so I do think that some conversation from people who are familiar to try to understand what kinds of actions can be taken, but I'm not talking about actions that we can do. I'm talking about actions that we can do, including reaching out to others that we want to engage in this process.
And I think it would be lovely to address one of these questions about mapping and visualizing what's actually happening.
Yes.
One of the constructive things that we can do that doesn't seem to have happened at a very thorough level is doing a map of costs and of potential benefits. And many of the people who've thought about this come back and say, we'd love to do this, but it involves aligning a bunch of different systems and we only have access to one. And so to anyone reading this, if you read some of the federal roadmaps, they say to anyone reading this, if you could please align all of these different potential cost and funding sources, that would be very helpful. So.
A lot of this is terra incognita to me personally. Are there national institutions that we should all be aware of that deal with this homelessness problem in the terms that Enir set out? Like, what are the institutional authority nodes in this large national network that deal with homelessness? And is that relevant to the present discussion?
There are a number of national groups like the National Homeless Coalition. There's many private foundations, such as the Conrad Hilton Foundation, which if you check their website, they've done enormous amounts of discussion and research about some of these problems. In terms of scientific studies, one kind of experience that led to kind of a epiphany was the economic contraction that took place around 2008, 2010, where not just in cities, but rural and suburban counties that you think of as well-to-do places like Suffolk County, Long Island, they were alarmed at the number of people suddenly seeking shelter because they had somehow were, their homes were underwater financially, jobs were lost, and so on. And I think it's not accurate to think of homelessness as simply a problem of big urban cities. It reaches out now. And that goes along with the problem of the opioids and all that sort of thing, reaching well into suburbia and rural America.
Deborah, could you tell us a little bit about
Judy.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. That's so funny. That's always what people mix it up.
We had
so
someone
let us out ourselves. Fred and I are old friends. When Fred worked for the city of Cambridge, I worked in a nonprofit that was called Shelter Inc. is now called Heading Home, and we were very close counterparts. In other words, he was administering the HUD money, and my organization was spending it to help homeless individuals and families. So we've been in this world a long time. And I guess I'm wondering if you guys think it would be helpful for between the two of us to lay out a little bit of information about
Absolutely.
how federal, it's only one piece of it and it's only the federal piece, but maybe it's some interesting framing about homeless strategies and how it's evolved. Shall I
That would be great.
talk for 3 seconds here? Maybe more than 3, but not many more. I will say that when Fred and I started working in homelessness. The response to homelessness was essentially wait until people have lost everything, they've spiraled downwards, they're tens of thousands of dollars in debt, and when they finally cannot be in housing anymore, then we will offer shelter, and then we'll offer shelter, and with this was all undertaken with the best will in the world, and we'll create a pathway of obligations that they need to meet in order to, at the end of all this, receive the plum of permanent housing. I mean, or if it's going to have a subsidy attached. So that was a real strategy that was thought to be the way to go.
And how long ago was that?
80s.
80s, yeah. And in the course of that, I will say that HUD almost was prescient in saying, but communities need to work together to create allocation decision processes. You have to do this. We don't want to just fund individual programs anymore. We actually want to force communities to gather data, to look at that data, and to present some kind of picture of an inventory of projects that meets the needs that are identified. Am I making any sense?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I would say that it became a real sort of if you build it, they will come thing, that from 3 shelters in Massachusetts for families in the 80s, there are now like 112. So this was not a winning strategy. This was not ending homelessness. So I'm going to fast forward, or other things that happened, I'm going to fast forward to around the recession time. One of the big 2009, one of the big stimulus programs that came out of the Obama administration was called Homelessness Prevention and Rapid Rehousing, HPRP, homelessness. So it was $1.5 billion that was meant to retain people's housing whenever possible. This was all for renters, and to rapidly rehouse people who were either in shelter or who were at the shelter door. The idea was to stop using shelters as a resource, but to try to keep people housed or very quickly divert them into housing. And that the strategic framing for that was evidence-based. Actually, these people in New York figured out that homeless individuals, even like really addicted, ill, chronically, mentally ill, physically ill street people could be moved quickly into housing. It's called Housing First. And that by putting them in housing and then bringing wraparound services designed to sustain that tenancy, they became healthier. Their use of other services was sharply reduced. They weren't they weren't living like a suburban, fabulous life, but they were having easier times. Their life was more stable. Their cost per individual dropped sharply. So this was evidence-based coming out of the individual world. Based on the homeless individual world, which is quite different, the dynamics and the conditions that lead to individual homelessness are, in my view, quite different from families. And that's a part of it that is a nuance that needs to be, not a nuance, it's a big thing. It was the rapid rehousing in the stimulus package was also designed to draw on that housing first strategy and say, let's just get people into housing. We'll wrap things around. It's got to be cheaper. This is going to be the way to contain sort of the cascading housing instability that we know is going to be there. We're going to prevent it where we can. We're going to get people back into housing, because otherwise we're going to have a huge bloated shelter system and people in this interim state like for years. So I'm just going to say that rapid rehousing is all the rage now in this federal environment. Rapid rehousing is seen as a very important strategy. Recently, just last week, a big study came out comparing rapid rehousing and other modalities that kind of cast into question, is this actually as good as everybody says? And I will say I have a very smart colleague who's doing some really great comparisons that says basically when you tier people and you put the right people into rapid rehousing, when it's the right intervention for them, it's a very good intervention for them. But that's the world we're in. And then there's a whole coordinated access thing, but can't deal with that.
So I guess
You can.
that was a great start. It's a hugely complex problem, which is why I was attracted to this meeting. Because people who are homeless are not by any means homogeneous. So there are people for whom different solutions work really well, and there are other people for whom they don't. And as a nation, we're often attracted to doing things as cheaply as possible to solve a problem. And so, for example, with permanent supportive housing, Housing First, that was seen as a great solution to the costs generated by people who have, including homelessness and other chronic health issues, pose behavioral challenges that involve incarceration and public safety issues, repeated use of detox facilities, etc. So these are the most costly people, and it was seen as cost effective to provide permanent supportive housing for those people. That's not a cost effective solution for everybody. There are a lot of people that it would be cheaper to just let die on the streets because they're not bothering anybody. So if that's the basis for how we make decisions as a society, that's not really where we'll go, where I want to go anyway. Rapid rehousing could be a very effective strategy if it were combined with extensive wraparound services or longer term wraparound services for a lot more people than it is working for now. But again, this notion of there are people for whom if you get them housing and provide a short amount of supports, there is some kind of support network in the community, varies tremendously across the country, urban, rural, rich states, poor states, whatever, people who have families or not, that can support them once they're in the community or that they can support themselves. There are a lot of people who need much more extended support. But as we think about homelessness in general, I think we really have to sort of not treat it as a monolith. I think that that's really right. There are individuals and families who become homeless due to domestic violence. They have different needs. There are people who are homeless because of addiction, because of the trauma that they brought home from military combat, because of mental illness, because, as you mentioned, the competency that's required to support yourself at a wage that allows you to pay for the prevailing costs of housing is increasing. And I've been surveying domestic violence providers across the country, and some of them are horrified about the cost of $800 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment that their clients can't afford. But that's all dependent on the geography. People in Cambridge and Somerville would kill for an apartment, a 2-bedroom apartment for $800. But across the country, there's a higher and higher threshold for what you have to earn in order to be able to support yourself. And if you have a family, there are all these other costs. Right now, we're talking as a nation about changing sentencing laws and prison policy, incarceration policies. There's a huge population that when these folks are discharged from prison without proper preparation, are either going to end up in county jails or on the streets. The shelters and the streets have often been a massive warehouse for people who are formerly incarcerated, and people who staff shelters see a revolving door between prisons, jails, and homeless facilities. So there are so many different issues. There are huge numbers of people who have been sexually assaulted in our societies that have different kinds of trauma that don't necessarily fit into the domestic violence world and end up in homeless situations. And they have other needs that there's just a multiplicity. And then when you talk about all of the different cultural and ethnic communities that have come here, the trafficking issue, the opioid issue, as somebody mentioned, there's just a lot of reasons.
There's one more sort of organizational thing I think we should put out here, because you posited a model of a really decentralized approach. I think that's what I heard.
I'll have to explain what that looks like.
So let me just take 3 more seconds to explain what is going on right now. So I said that they've created this thing called a continuum of care, where communities were supposed to make allocation decisions jointly. Related to that is legislation. It is a complex requirement called coordinated entry that basically says in a city or whatever the geographic region that decides to work together in this way, you are mandated to create some kind of standardized access model called coordinated entry. There's standard assessment, there's routing people with different issues to different places, but that is a real drive to this kind of standardization, seen as facilitated.
It will work just as well as standardized testing in schools, which is not at all.
Well, on the other side, as we know, people jumping around from organization to organization, wondering whether this is the one that could serve them or that's the one that could serve them, is also
an intake process, which I'm not saying that there shouldn't be some intake process, but why don't we?
Okay.
Let me not.
I just wanted to make sure people understood that's in the wind right now.
We
That
also
people are mandated to do that.
You just also say that the way we've addressed homelessness has been extremely decentralized in the sense that states have determined how families would be treated. For the most part, HUD does not get involved in shelter at all. HUD is a very small funder of shelter-related services, and so family shelter, in Massachusetts, family shelter is an entitlement. It's the only state in which it's an entitlement. I believe there might be one more. So there, how shelter is allocated varies from state to state. Sometimes it varies from county to county if the states don't have particular policies or don't control all the funding. Sometimes shelter originated as a charitable decision, a community-based initiative, and that's how there were 3 shelters in Massachusetts at the beginning. Charitable and religious-based shelters, faith-based shelters, are still an important player. The other end of the spectrum, as somebody pointed out, is housing. HUD is a major funder of the subsidies that go into housing, and they will be the first to say that there is not enough. There are not enough subsidies, there's not enough affordable housing anywhere in the country, and so even if you have a somewhat rational system for moving people into the services that they need, there has to be something at the end. Right now, there isn't that at the end. There aren't enough transitional programs, permanent supportive housing programs, shelter beds, programs providing employment support. So all of the things that a rational system might help people get into don't necessarily exist at this point. So,
which is what this program is trying to remedy, what you just described.
It's trying to get people to what exists. It's supposed to make the pathway for the client easier to what exists.
It's not changing what exists.
It's not really increasing the pie.
right. So it's still reallocating who gets the help. So instead of my getting the help, Judy gets the help because she has a higher priority. But that doesn't, when the communities that have begun to use systems like this have long lists of people whose scores of need, which one could argue are not necessarily very rational either, they tend to be very linear. But that just means that there are a bunch of people who need help but aren't at the top of the list to get it, or need housing and aren't at the top of the list to get it. And when you're not at the top of the list, then there aren't enough sources of housing or assistance.
So I would add, one comment that I would make is that there was a statement that we need to measure. I would add that we don't just need to measure the problem, we need to measure the space of solutions that exists at this time. I.e., the system has to be characterized as it currently exists before we can identify effective interventions. We have 2 newcomers. Why don't you start? Sam is actually
welcome
conducting things. So.
Also, sorry, we're streaming this online. If you mind, we'll be sure to. You can sit on this side of the room, and we won't capture you. Is that okay with you? Okay, great. You want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, my name is Ronnie St. Bell. I was invited by Mark, and I am a graduate of Boston University. I majored in urban planning. I did a lot of research in homelessness and housing, and that's all there is to know about me.
Are you still working on that?
Actually, I graduated in December 2014. I just secured a new position with the team lead, the neighborhood developers in Chelsea. That's under AmeriCorps Vista. And I'll be working for that organization, and I'll be developing new job skills, targeting specific companies that can help low-income people find jobs as well as housing.
When you say developing new job skills, setting up programs that help people develop those skills?
It's more so working for the infrastructure to leave behind. So it's more like helping them building resume, cover letters, as well as saving those things for the future of that program. If you don't mind, I mean, whatever they want to use, I don't know what system they want to use, but it's got to be permanent for them to use.
Great, thank you.
Hi, my name is Jerome Robinson. I was also invited by Mark. So basically, I'm actually going back to school, Cambridge College in particular, to study human services, to actually get back to the community in terms of homelessness. I was actually a part of the homelessness community for a long time, actually, from the early 2000s up until about 2007, 2008, when I got my own place, which I am in now in Arlington, and I'm loving it, by the way. And so I really want to get back to the community, just like I said, giving back. And and some other things I want to do as well. So I just wanted to come out and check it out. Heard a lot of positive things about this particular institute as well. So,
I have a question that maybe Ronnie or Jerome could respond to. I've read some data suggesting that about 40% of the homeless population nationwide is composed of African Americans, as opposed to say 11% of the total general population. Is there any truth to that, or is that an exaggeration? And is there any special issues that an African American might have, say, dealing with police on the street, or other problems where one could end up incarcerated versus in a shelter or something else?
You want to know?
I'll let you feel that.
Okay. Recently turned in the final exam that can help me answer your question. I'm not sure what the exact percentage is, but Shelley is an author. She wrote about homelessness, why minorities, not just African Americans, but minorities. Asians are probably the lowest percentage in the minority group that fall under that umbrella that you are asking, but definitely African Americans are the largest percentage under that umbrella, minorities. And so I can't remember her last name, but Shelley did, she says that it's more so not color or race, it's probably the way the system and the rules are set up. And she gave legitimate reasons, but I guess what you're asking, is that true? There is some truth to it. Why that is, I don't know if you want me to get into details what my research showed me and what it proves shows. And I think I don't know the exact percentage, but it's thousands and thousands across the nation, I would say.
I have a question about something you said. Is anybody in a room, not necessarily just you, aware why the Asians are such a low percentage, and maybe there are lessons in that community that could be learned for other minorities?
As an Asian, I could say something to that. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, very mixed group back in the 60s, 65 to 73. And we're always the other group. It's interesting. I have lots of friends in lots of other politically active groups. Asians tend to kind of lay low. And Asians aren't always nice to the next people off the boat either, just for the record. But being the perpetual other is a very interesting thing. It's like we're ambassadors without portfolio. And you can learn a lot just by eating dinner at a lot of families' houses and going to wherever they go. And the first thing I remember is everybody's family's crazy. And the second thing is how we deal with that is very personal and private, which means it's kind of a pressure cooker. So I actually love it. Actually, at Harvard, two things. One is the school to prison pipeline and the other stuff that Charles Ogletree's Charles Hamilton Houston Institute for Race and Justice, they're looking at pipelines. They might be a very interesting group to partner with. They have clinical students at Harvard Law School who are very motivated, and at the Kennedy School of Government. So that could be a source of energy and kind of mutual ambassadors across age groups. The second thing is...
Well, let me actually say
Sure.
something about it,
Sure.
because one of the things that we put up last time was social connectivity.
Yes.
And because social connectivity varies dramatically between the groups, that may be one of the key factors that we're talking about.
Well, you near to that point. Last night, Future Boston had a creative thing for men of color, and I still qualify. So I went to that. And I think they'd be a very interesting group to have in the room. Malia worked for Harry Belafonte on social race issues and equity and just access. And she was just in Hawaii and said there are more and more people homeless on the beaches. And that's in a lower socially pressurized in some ways area than the urban environments here. But it is breaking out all over. And I don't think anyone's really collected the patterns.
Hey,
And
this
looked
is
for commonalities across the patterns and done a stress analysis that, there could be a wonderful online resource of here's what we're finding, do you have stuff? And she said, it doesn't seem like anyone has the library, but perhaps Greater Boston could trigger a worldwide effort to get alumni of Boston, to contribute information from wherever they happen to be roaming at the time. So that was a Boston World Partnership effort. So, and the last part is at Harvard, 60 groups, they're Asian, filed suit or protested against Harvard University itself, saying there's a bamboo ceiling. I don't know what the particulars of that are, but I think it was in the Harvard media. And also, interestingly enough, it's now called the Harvard T.H. Chen School of Public Health. And Mr. Chen honors his father. Mr. Chen is the guy behind, I think it's Dartco Realty. And he's buying a lot of space in and around Harvard Square. There's a good interview in the Globe where, he drives his own car. He's trying to figure some things out. He could be an interesting resource as well. So,
Can I rephrase my question because
Could I jump in?
you got very close but didn't.
Okay. All right.
So it sounds like connectivity is, if not the main thing, certainly one of the very important ones. And in presentation of Judy and it didn't sound that like HUD or any other agency has even tried to tap anywhere close to it. And if I understood it correctly, perhaps maybe that would be the key to a lot of other things.
Yes.
Can I jump in really quick?
It's
Can you hear me?
missing as a concept, it's missing as a practice.
Could we just say what the it is? I'm not sure whether
Social
we're trying to,
connectivity.
Social connectivity.
at the individual level
Well,
or
that's the whole point.
organizational?
The whole point of the individual. The people who are homeless are not well connected to a social community. And either to family, friends, and others. And the
That's
point
not
is
always
that
the
one,
case.
if one treats it as an individual issue, again, I don't know, but if one treats it as an individual's problem as opposed to the problem of the individual in their context, it's a very different kind of thing.
For example, if you attend a church, your church community is likely to help you out with homelessness. Whereas if you're not socially connected, you don't have that.
But not that I know, I probably know the least about homeless people in this room, so I'm just saying, but it does, the little bit that I do know, they do seem to, try and help each other out. I mean, the homeless people all know each other and they all, I think.
So it might not be connected or disconnected necessarily, but what the connection is, who the connection is, and what resources those that are connected to.
How enriches their networks.
Do nothing but reinforce the homelessness. In other words, if it's a defensive connection, purely defensive, and doesn't go out into the community and the community does not reach, and that part for sure is not happening, then that connectivity among homeless people doesn't seem to translate into greater acumen that gets you housed.
I want to point out that Anne experienced homelessness firsthand and speaks from experience, not just theoretically. And I think she has a lot to offer about the experience of trying to reach out or be reached by various entities and the difficulties that one might come across.
So we have a ping online. Willow wanted to chime in. She's been taking notes.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
We
can see you. Yeah, that's better.
Okay, wonderful. I'm gonna take my headphones off while I talk, otherwise I'll have an echo. So Joe Goldie writes a lot about eviction culture, and it's not a lack of social fabric that many people have, it's that the social fabric that they had was torn apart, in large part through things like gentrification. And so that's why, in part, there are racial biases in this also, is that those are the neighborhoods which are being disrupted, because there are also voices which are not traditionally included in decision-making processes. That's the thing that I wanted to throw in.
Who was the mentioned?
Joe Goldie.
Can I say something a little bit about how social connections? So it really depends, again, who we're talking about. So, for example, if we're talking about survivors of domestic violence, their situation may be compromised if they take advantage of some of the social connections that they had. If we're talking about the huge numbers of individuals who've cycled through the prison system, that because in many cases they have felonies, they're not welcome in housing that has a public subsidy. In fact, in many cases, they're not able to be housed, share housing with other people simply because of lease restrictions on how many adults can live together. And those are both municipal public health kinds of public health and safety kinds of guidelines, or they may be lease restrictions, or they may be subsidy restrictions, or they may be HUD restrictions about whether certain people can be part of a household if they have a felony in their background. If we're talking about people who burn bridges due to addiction or mental illness or other behavioral challenges, they're not welcome. And they've, as somebody mentioned, they've destroyed a part of, they've burned their bridges, they've destroyed a part of their social safety network. So, and in many cases, we're talking about people whose support networks are not seriously financially better off than the people who are homeless. And so it's, there isn't a lot, it's sort of how the notion of assets is really important in terms of passing on wealth to the next generation. And that's something that's increasingly understood. Well, when you have families with limited wealth and limited resources, then their ability to help other people who are on the margins is very much diminished. And quite frankly, as the person who founded the National Center on Family Homelessness, Ellen Bassett, researched years ago, the difference between marginally housed families and families that have become homeless is not very great at all. People teeter on the edge of instability in our culture, and the more and more the cost of survival in our country increases, the more people are teetering on that edge. So depending on safety, social networks and safety nets alone isn't adequate. There's a combination. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient.
Yes, and this is a direct answer, and that's as precise as I can be based on my research to your question. Because you asked me, do I know why, and maybe if there is something that exists, such as why African American community probably get the short end of the stick. So Shelley Halls, she did a research on this, which I use for my project. So I gave you a very prominent example is low-income African-American women usually, so everyone falls under the umbrella of poverty. So, and like he just stated that, it seems like you don't have the wealth that distributed to the future generation, and they so happen to be poor. So they get a special housing voucher that only certain landlords would take. And so when they'll take these vouchers, they usually make some kind of agreement with the landlord, or should I say, the landlord assumes there's an agreement that they should get something, a favor back. And so when these things happen, they report that sexual harassment, something happened. So there's article Title 42 that needs them to evacuate the room as long as they read a report.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have somebody from HUD. I thought all the landlords required to take the vouchers. They cannot discriminate against.
I'm actually
They can
not, I don't
choose
know
to
the law
not.
well.
I don't think so. I think it's against the federal law.
Yeah, they can choose to.
I don't think
based
so. I think
on-
that they're required to take. It's considered discrimination.
But if there's too many people applying, they get to choose, and that's where they get some leeway in choosing.
And I can tell you the person who did this research, Megan. I'll look for her last name because I don't want to misquote her. But so that when that happens, that alone just make those women homeless. That makes any sense? And they cannot go back to that same environment, that premise. They are not allowed.
But when you're talking about the passing the wealth, why doesn't the same problem occurs in an Asian community?
Well,
Why is the Asian community able to handle all of that? I mean, they certainly, when I came to this country, I didn't speak any English. And one of the schools I went to study English was in Chinatown.
Right.
I was the only white person there. Everybody else was right off the boat, Vietnamese. They did not speak a word of English. They lived 28 people into one bedroom apartment. None of them were home.
That's the key.
None of them were homeless. They never went out and had a single meal out. Within a very short time, like 6 months, a year, they were all able to buy out laundromats, 24 stores, and so forth and so on in Roxbury. And I remember when in the 80s, all the Black community was very upset that all the Asians were buying out their little businesses. So my question again, and I suspect, I could be wrong, but I suspect it's a connectivity before you become homeless, not after you become homeless, that may help you. So my question again,
I think
why?
you answered the question.
Is
Yeah,
it-
it was very well said.
Yeah.
It's fine.
not
The point is
sure.
that this is one of the aspects of what's going on. We don't know because we don't have a scientific analysis
No.
here. But to speculate that this may contribute to what's going on.
There are good stories in Hong Kong when I was doing work there. The secretaries often had much greater net worth than the executives from Rupert Murdoch's organization because they did what you said. And that goes back for generations and generations and generations. It's a way of, if you go into New York City, Upper West Side, the nail salon, the corner store, they're all living that, and they don't see it as terrible, they see it as a rite of passage. So they concentrate wealth, they minimize the need to spread out. In other words, they don't buy into the American dream.
Well,
not right away. There's a
And
concentration.
so maybe that's the reason that Asians have such a low percentage of homelessness. So maybe
But
teaching
I
that to a Black
I
community.
don't know that we want to go too far in making conclusions about what we know at this point. pretty speculative, all of these discussions.
I'm personally interested in what this gentleman was talking about because it sounds like something that could happen. There could be implicit segregation because of people who are and are not willing to take vouchers according to preference and who game the system in such a way. This sounds completely legitimate, so I would like to know the name of the author personally.
I can look it up for you. So once they are, should I say, they are not bound by the institution or by the government to take those vouchers. They can choose. So I want to set that out.
I think it's a
and
federal
clear.
law.
Yeah, but
So let me look it up, and I can get back to you about this before the end of the meeting, because I'm gonna go back to my project and find it.
It could be law versus practice,
Right.
and we know that there's plenty of gaps in that one.
You know, the other way of getting around it is simply charging a rent that's above the rent that HUD calls the fair market rent, and that's what's happening. Not necessarily as a way of getting around Section 8, but basically if landlords can make more money than HUD is willing to pay as a subsidized rent, then people are not taking subsidies, and increasingly there's a problem placing people who have subsidies in housing because they can't find units that are available at rents that HUD will be willing to approve.
So I'm hoping we can get a little bit of time in smaller group discussions. We usually do breakouts for half an hour. And a couple of the topics that I've heard extended interest in are figuring out what Cambridge is doing, next steps for the city, figuring out modeling questions or measurement questions. What are things that would be helpful to have better measures for? And what are existing models for the problem space? And a few people have mentioned some edge cases, and one of the threads.
Somewhat?
Some edge cases.
Somewhat?
So families that are teetering on the edge between being housed and not being housed. Just a specific subgroup population that is better known as a point of departure.
Also identifying institutions and what they're doing.
Institutions other than HUD, for instance.
Right, one of the topics was measuring of the nature of the institutional space as opposed to just the problem space. I don't know whether that's what you mean. But.
So how I don't get the word measure then in that case because I don't. Okay, and name it.
Start with naming it.
I'll mention one institution, and that's at the University of Chicago.
Wait, don't go into the specifics.
Yeah.
Are there other topics that people would like to discuss?
Yeah, please raise. I mean, I think the question is, what do we want to talk about in small groups?
As we look at I hear this as a migration. People migrate in and out of housing. They migrate up and down the socioeconomic scale. Some people start with more privilege than others and don't realize that other people have a different. I mean, it's like having an access key, right? To be in different social strata. The term status quo has come up a lot. I want to propose that we think about status flow. I want to propose that we think about a system where people flow effortlessly as an ideal, where the system is set up so that the measures and other things, it tends to help everybody to be in the right pathway or the right pipeline. And this is actually very modelable as a series of pipelines, and I would submit that we actually don't know what the series of pipelines are and what's regulating the valves, and maybe there's already work on this that we could build on and take local data and attach it to these existing pipelines and then start to get a systems flow thing going that anybody could look at.
I agree. I mean, I think that's really important. I think there's a cultural piece. There's like a values piece. Do we want a flow that says go through these 9 steps and at the end you get the thing? Or do we want something that says move in first and then we'll take responsibility to keep you there?
Or how much agency does the individual, if they have the right picture of flow,
To address that question, or is it something that we want to talk about?
Do we need to research? I mean, it's just like we need to figure it out. It's not like It doesn't exist.
Right.
If this is July, they have a plan.
That would be great, because I like being specificity and knowing, concrete examples instead of talking generalizations.
And the other thing is, Somerville also has a very sophisticated homeless setup already. So it might, and they're different and they're not the same, even though many of the people travel across them. So that's another dynamic.
Maybe we add Cambridge and Somerville.
So let's say that group, if we want to talk about that group would discuss who we should reach out to get solid information for our discussion.
If you'd like to triangulate Roxbury's having this conversation right now, and actually I stood at their meeting in Roxbury and said, why don't you follow Somerville?
Yeah, why don't you do that? You'd be in Somerville.
No, I mean, why don't you triangulate, right? Why don't we triangulate 3 communities, because they can cross-pollinate, and then it's a comparison model.
So just one thing about one of the frustrations about being in any community and thinking about, especially in Massachusetts, which is so fragmented. It's not like LA County, which is a large, Massachusetts doesn't do counties, and each individual community looking at what it's doing in its community when it's being acted on by much larger forces. It's really, it's kind of like bailing water when the water is coming in from all of the surrounding sides. Homelessness originates all over Massachusetts and New England. People, as Judy said, if you build it, they will come. The metropolitan Boston area has very generously built shelters and transitional housing programs and halfway houses and other programs to serve people who are living on the margins, whether addiction or mental illness or domestic violence or whatever. And those folks come, and those programs and the programs that provide meals and everything else brings people. It's one of the things that communities are afraid of. Oh my God, you're going to attract those folks into our community. But so these communities have taken responsibility, which is something to be honored. But looking at the problem with those borders and not really recognizing the impact that's beyond their of forces beyond their control really misses an important analysis.
Yeah, that's been my homeless experience, is that I'm a member of the Harvard Square Business Association, and we realized that the homeless people were not eating because there was no public bathroom. And so they were so embarrassed about not having a facility. So we set out to set up one public bathroom, and for some reason the whole thing failed. And
Rob,
it's a mystery.
Rob, let's break out.
No, I'm just a story. That's right.
Great. It's an awesome story, and hopefully someone in each of the groups will take some notes from what people are discussing. So I have 4 groups right now, and if we could just go around and people indicate, raise your hand if you're interested in talking about that group for 25 minutes. Cambridge and Somerville specifics, including parallels in other cities.
Can you read up the 4 categories? Just
right. So we have specifics in Cambridge and Somerville, and identifying people who we can reach out to get details about how the cities are progressing. Mapping the institutional space, figuring out what big institutions are doing, starting with HUD, but finding the many other institutions that are active. Models and measurement, things that would be useful to have visuals and maps for that we might not have data for. And status flow, trying to capture what kind of migration happens and what the series of pipelines is.
What's the difference between the second and third one? The
One is
second,
about measuring the system or representing the system, and the other one is about measuring profit.
We can combine them. There aren't too many people here.
Why don't we
So people, if you're interested in mapping the institutions and identifying measurements, raise your hand. Great. Interested in migration, status flow, and pipelines, how people pass between different systems.
Yeah, a small committee.
How is that different than measurement? Because
and they're talking about presumably understanding the process of transitions of people as a process.
I think they're all related because they're all dynamic looks at it, but they're different facets of the same diamond in the rough, if you will. And the problem I have is I think the mindset of macro looking down and individual looking up and then middle people being intermediaries, I think we need to look at all those mindsets at the same time, because I think in those different mindsets we might find interesting gaps.
Right.
So
It felt like we had two groups, kind of the macro and the micro,
Right,
and maybe we should break into two
right.
groups.
and then see what we have.
There also there were general discussions and very specific discussions about the city, but we could ask everyone to focus on details about Cambridge and Somerville.
Sam, the capital flow is the conversation they're having about money flow. So you can have social capital flow as part of this. I'm just saying.
Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah.
8-person groups are a little bit large. We could try it, but it would be a good sized group to have 3 different discussions, even if there's some overlap.
So what is the 3 groups?
But
The 3 groups on the board, and we'll divide them.
Great. All right, so at the macro level, we have sort of data and models and flow, and at the micro, we had details from Cambridge and surrounding cities. And this includes things like what's happening this year.
In homelessness in Cambridge.
Yeah.
That's okay, we got it.
Nobody once again got a show of hands.
So these are now 2
Do you have a
groups.
third group that you were thinking
Yeah,
of?
I
A
don't
third
see.
group?
The third group was migration and status flow.
But the flow is a.
Is that like client pathway?
Right. I don't know enough about the term that you're using, but I see it as the mutual, the client, the agency, the structure, the
Yes.
client, the people managing the system
System,
have a
yeah.
common mindset, and they can look at some simple things and be on the same page. There's a lot of traffic flow stuff that Joe, I've seen them working on things in Somerville. There's sort of a way to see things before you even get into the meeting, which fascinate me.
So are there 3 people that would like to work with Mark on that?
So Mark, you were offering to lead a discussion about this.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to not lead it as much as hear from other people how we might. To me, it's the data model with the flow. It's a dynamic data model.
Got it.
Stocks
Okay.
and flows.
So maybe these are two macro questions.
With one map.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. So let's start with the micro. Who's interested in talking about details from the city? Homelessness in Cambridge, Somerville, surrounding groups.
I got 2 people.
And again, show of hands, people interested in data and models and what we know, and what we need to know. All right, that leaves
Some people who are not
5 or 6 people who are not decided.
Draw a line.
If you're interested in talking about something else, now's your chance to speak up.
Everybody.
Why don't undecided folks go to the small group?
Yes.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right, so which group is meeting where? The data people will meet here?
Sure.
And then there's a conference room.
Conference
Homelessness
room?
in Cambridge and Somerville can meet in the conference room by the front.
And Sam, how long do we have before we come back?
And there's
Take
food
25
that we should
minutes.
take on the way into the meeting.
Until 5 to 6.
So can you
And
shut
we
down?
have pizza that.
Can you shut down so I can go to my warehouse?
Thank you very much.
And Willow, do you have a preference for which group stays with the laptop?
Be wherever it makes sense for the laptop to be.
Okay, that's fine. We may leave you in here then.
So can I just say something? I may know people to whom a call to understand what's happening. I do know people in places outside of Belgium. But I don't want to be in that group because that's what I do. That's like, that's my salary. I want to go and get that level. I'm like, oh, well, you might contact me. So let's do it. Thank you.
well.
The other thing is I gave him a morning before a long weekend in New York, so I didn't have
You know, I've been involved in some people and trying to do it. Doing that, I see around how things evolve, and it's always a long process. It's a long process.
So we'll send out a note
And if you give up, then the people who make the decisions will have the money to do what they want.
I went to the planning meeting and I was so disheartened by the way it was.
We're making progress. It's but
So I'm finding it, I work in Somerville now.
There's less control involved. It's kind of like watching something where you see a video and you're extraordinary when someone where you started Robin's brother, they tried to be US US 2-1, right? So we met Somerville.
everything takes a long time. Everything takes a long time.
So,
They had and he's doing it for Audi. So let's put him I will start writing the way that post the modeling and games. There are people at MIT doing games. Yes. Oh, I love this. But you know what's interesting? We're not putting it in one flow. It's simple. There's
so lots of models that exist.
Yes.
So we should see what's there. This is
That's
why I
right.
decided that I really didn't want to talk about it, but I can't understand the context.
Do you think that there was like
Judy, I love the name House first. Why?
nobody in government ever looks.
You know what? Cloud computing, it's design based and it should be bottom up. It's the right computing. And also hypercomputing, I'll write about it. You'll see these models are there.
I did constantly 40 years in Europe, and you recognize that once you have
in this area.
Oh no, sorry. I was saying
We were very hard.
Right, so it's good to make it, I think it's worth
Fascinating.
Yeah, you know, once we
There's
understand
so much that really is this kind of
But the reality is
values.
so
In
many people
Massachusetts,
who, because
we feel that if we touch a family once, we are about them to the end of time.
There's nothing
There are
wrong with
other
that.
places that say, we are about to solve this housing problem right now. We
You're gonna
got
see
this
the
person
history.
stable, and then we hand them off to another system.
I have a quick question for you, as usual. What happened to the, remember we were discussing the festival last time I was here for the 1st of January?
But oftentimes,
Lately? I thought I was out of the loop because I
we
don't.
don't have,
Oh, my friend, I have a note on my
we
thing
don't
that
have an
says
income
that
to
I'll
afford
fire.
lawyer. And when you get a post lawyer,
But I didn't do
I
it
mean,
yet.
you're not gonna
I've
do
been
so
thinking
much
a lot
money.
about.
And that's just my speculation. I didn't get into that research
I
on
mean-
my project. And there are other
I'm not-
laws
I'm
that they are bound by, not just
Putting on
Article
I'm going to
42,
work, going
which
to
just
tomorrow,
says
it's like,
whenever
that's
there
what
is a
I knew
state
was
made a claim or there's an
Regular
accusation
Continuous
alleged,
contact. Me too. Why don't I give you my phone?
not there because
Where's your
the
phone?
other one continues to
You
say,
own a phone?
It's
What do you wanna do
not
next?
trying to find the article again. Yeah, so it's just a system, it's not, because he asked me a question directly, how do, so his question to me was posed basically, are they doing something physically to African Americans? Well, the point is, we should be together, affordable public housing and have them end up in the street.
But it's not just
And
psychological.
no, because he even said that, are they being policed differently? He said that at last, I just didn't want to get into that. because that's not my expertise. I just wanted to get in housing. So I told them first, it's not just African Americans. So there is a chunk of minority. So I agreed to this. The other woman told me this. Now, I don't have any specific evidence. No, I'm just saying.
It's overflow.
No. I'm not equipped to answer these questions, and I don't want to give you answers that I don't know.
I was mostly asking this question to for people to think about it.
Right. And no, I was just saying that. I said, okay, how do you want me to answer the question? And then the discussion went around. But I came back to say specifically African American women. So that's the section that I studied. And I told my research which is when landlords choose not to take the vouchers. And so when they make the exception for those women or for the women who are in need, they feel like there is
if you want to gather around, this is supposed to be the measurement one.
It's like me. I did a figure for you, you're supposed to do a figure every time. And so when most of the time we ask for social favors, and they don't ask, and so when they make that report, the article, Title 42, it's to allow them to
So you're still working on your
that makes sense. So that's the fact that the system that they haven't.
So if you want to take a seat, so I would like, I actually, we have limited time, so why don't we take a seat over?
It's all about.
Just so you know, I have to leave in a few minutes.
That's why I said we have limited time. So why don't you come over this way?
I have a 6 o'clock meeting at the project.
Happy to have people raise questions the way they wish. I mean, this is the measurement meeting. I think the real question is, how do we go about enabling more projects? I think there was some discussion last time of using the GPS type monitoring to develop a better understanding of homelessness dynamics and geographic. The people who are having that conversation in that field. Why don't you?
I'm not trying not to exclude them, but I'm trying to answer everyone to stand this question.
Yeah.
You didn't take any.
We're starting with a measurement.
Yeah.
So
Starting, I'd like to think that you start with what's out there and then you figure out what's wrong with what's out there. Yeah, what's missing?
I think you say a lot of data exists. Be interested to hear where's the data.
It's a lot of it is on a place called the HUD Exchange. There's a website where there's a lot
Now,
of
when
data.
you talk about geographical data, I think what we're talking about is kind of real-time data. You know, sort of daily movements where people go.
Well, that's definitely something that doesn't exist.
Right. Doesn't.
Can you talk about why what you mean by that? In other words, are you trying to track people, specific people?
Nowadays, there's an opportunity to gain some. I'm not saying that this is the answer to all the questions that we've been talking about today, but this was something that was raised last time we had a meeting 2 weeks ago. There's an opportunity, and part of the reason this was raised is because there's some discussion about the geographical nature of homelessness. The question was, is it really in the middle of cities? Because there's opportunities there for eating, but there's no housing. The location being important is that some one part of what's going on. You can have beggars that can get money in the middle of the city because there are a lot of people there, but they don't have where to live in the middle of the city. Is that what homelessness is? There was some discussion about that last time. So there was also a discussion about the use of geographical, i.e. giving homeless cell phones and using that to track their location, not for the purpose of tracking individuals, making sure that that's not being done. This was one of the conversations that happened. I do think that there is some an opportunity to gain some insight into what's going on with the homeless community by using such data. This is not, I was not particularly advocating this, but I'm just pointing out that there are many different kinds of ways that data might be collected. Given your knowledge of the system, I think it might be helpful for us to have a broader conversation.
I think there's some baseline sort of context stuff that we can help bring into the conversation. I don't particularly feel like I'm an expert in it. I do like transactional stuff. Fred is actually more of a data guy than I am, but we can certainly bring in some, here's what exists out there, and then we can look at that and say, what doesn't it tell us?
And so there's such a plethora of local institutions too that I think need to be named, and their relationship to.
Right,
for
so I was
example,
actually talking about sort of data on homeless people, and that's one whole body of things. Data change over time, different, emerging populations. But in terms of the institutions, yeah, that's.
I think that part of my point about saying that naming institutions, to give a name is not what eventually gives you the information, but to identify what it is that the institution is doing.
Exactly.
Is really the key piece of that information.
Yes.
And that's, in some sense, that's mapping the space that we're talking about. And for someone who's in the field, you build a map over time, but if we want to be able to apply a scientific analysis, we have to be able to have that represented in a way that can be incorporated in some mathematical analysis. And that's something that the way you build it is you start by talking to the experts and having them say, okay, so you have to figure out how to capture the information that people know about, including, specific information like the data of how many people are being housed at what shelter, or how many people are being treated at what detox facility, or what so on. So there are numbers associated with that, but the numbers are already associated with some scaffolding that says this is what the institution does, etc. That's the point.
You can hear a quick comment. Have you, is it too early, or have you already put out a call for this kind of information from the Boston Foundation?
No, we haven't. We are not, just to be clear, I'm just sort of introducing the subject. I want to hear what other people have to say. I'm actually in a more active role today because we somewhat had a communication gap between last time and this time, because the overlap was the people, including the people who are here, were not present at the last meeting. So I'm trying to carry forward some of the information from last time to this time. That's why I'm doing more of the talking. I think really the main thing is to have a conversation about what you think needs to be done.
So I'd be extremely interested, considering the complexity institute and complexity in the name, if there is any possibility to either measure or provoke and instill the habits of our Asian community into the Black community. Whatever it is that makes them not become homeless, is it possible to pass along?
So it's an important question, and that ultimately has to do with a societal analysis.
Right.
I'm all in favor of societal analyses. This is one of the things that we're engaged in doing. To say that would be it's an important project, first of all, to understand the differences between cultures, groups, and not just along the lines that we've defined, but more generally. This is something that we're actively interested and engaged in, but I think that that's a little bit outside of the domain of the current topic.
So there is
I'm not saying that it is irrelevant.
there is an I respectfully disagree with you, is because I don't. In my opinion, it doesn't matter how many housing we build.
That's fine, but I understand. But this is one dimension, and other dimensions have to do with professional employment, and other dimensions have to do with housing, structure of the society in terms of housing. There are many different dimensions that have to do with this problem as well as other problems. And eventually when we ask the question that you're asking, part of the issue is what are the value systems that lead people to behave in the way they do, and what are the rights that we have or do not have to specify what other people's value systems should be.
We only have the right if we are paying for the housing. If we are paying for them, whoever pays orders the music.
Well, that's also a value system that you have, and that has to be discussed in the societal context. So, I mean, these are issues that have to be raised as part of the discussion.
Well, I heard, I don't remember who measured how generous the state in building housing for the homeless, and yet it doesn't, and I don't know the numbers, please interrupt me, correct me if I'm wrong, the number of homelessness are not decreasing to the same degree as the housing being built more and more and more and more services being provided. So it seemed to me logically that unless and until that value system originally would be changed, and again, I'm going to give a very banal and very simplified example of it, that would be changed. Nothing will move. We'll still have homeless. We'll still have, people going to jail and then criminals coming out and nobody wants them in there. And it's going to be perpetual.
Why don't we hear from other people about their thoughts about the questions that are coming? You want to talk about this?
Well, I think that well, being, once being homeless myself, I think that, excuse me, I'm just, it's hard for me to focus right now. I've got a lot of things on my mind.
The main issue that we are addressing today here in this group is the question of what do we need to do in terms of characterization, measurement, and so on, in order to move forward, and what are the opportunities for action?
So, I guess one of the things that I have always thought, one of the things that I've always thought would be something that is helpful to do is to look at the systems of care that people come from when they become homeless and how they cycle through. I don't necessarily, I'm not ready to throw away people who are coming out of prison or to exile them somewhere. But I think that what happens is that there are educational systems that don't prepare people to succeed in society. People make bad choices, end up in prison. Once they end up in prison, or they end up in, or they get involved with drugs or substance abuse, they cycle through the same systems: homelessness, incarceration, treatment, homeless, incarceration, treatment. I think there, and I think that as a society we haven't figured out, or maybe we don't have the will to try to support people who are in those systems to re-enter the mainstream. Maybe we don't think we have the capacity to integrate all those people into the mainstream. But I think that would be very helpful to understand how people move from those systems to those systems and back again.
Has that been documented in the article?
Well, it's been documented that people move, but not the quantity and
so what would we do given, I mean, you have more understanding of the system than I do. What would we need to do in order to collect the information that can eventually drive changes in policy?
That's an interesting question. So there was a project that I was working on with county corrections in Massachusetts, trying to identify how many, how many people came from homelessness to county corrections and how many people exited county corrections to homeless situations. Data isn't collected, or it's collected in a way that you sort of see where they were the night before, but that doesn't necessarily measure what their general circumstance was. A lot of people are discharged to or say they're going to be discharged to a family member or friend, but then a week later.
So correct me if I'm wrong. From what you're telling me, the existing system is a point of contact system, right? There is a moment where the individual is in touch with the system. There may be an intervention made, like giving a meal or providing a bed or so on. But there isn't a system that is actually aware of what happens to the individual over time.
That's correct.
Okay.
So there is any organizations that get HUD funding are required to participate in the data collection system called Homeless Management Information System, which is a client-level data collection system. It's defined for regions or communities that work together, as Judy described before. So it might be defined on a citywide level, or a countywide level, or a statewide level. And that system, to the extent that people are identified consistently over the course of their participation in different programs that are all homelessness focused, that system is able to track people's movement and participation in shelters or transitional housing or permanent housing programs. Typically, the more the people with the who are served the least intensively, so the people who are on the street and people who are in shelter are tracked the least well. They move around the most. And the ability to do longitudinal tracking is the hardest for those folks. The
But
people
you
who
say
are,
there is some data resource.
Yeah.
there is data.
One would have to then determine from looking at the data.
That's
that
right.
It's not useful for
It's
answering
not
one
very
question.
accessible is a big problem.
Well, that's.
Oh, this is, can I jump in? Can you hear me?
HUD tracking.
Oops. I'm sorry. Were you speaking on?
Hi, Willow.
Oh, hi, Willow. Didn't recognize.
Hey, how's it going? Can I jump in really quick?
Yeah.
So this reminds me an awful lot of the conversations that we have around developmental data in all student areas. And so there's a lot of focus on, well, if we just knew more about what everyone was doing, then we could serve them better. And what we're starting to learn, and one of the things that I'm really excited about, is enabling people and equipping people to have conversations about taking care of themselves and about what they need and how to get those things, and then being available in those spaces to offer those things once they're asked for. I think that helps out in a lot of the fronts that we're talking about.
So Willow, I don't think I would disagree with you. I think that this particular group meeting, I think, was supposed to be about the data collection, but not that it's a solution to the problem.
No, not at all. And I guess in my mind, part of it is about various systems of care, whether they are treatment or incarceration, or systems that exist to serve people who've become homeless, whether there's a taking of responsibility for the outcomes of their services rather than simply saying, okay, they've left my system of care, and so now not my problem anymore. And so in the same way that schools are sometimes accused of graduating people without worrying about whether they're prepared to succeed in life. So some substance abuse treatment programs are not necessarily, or mental health treatment programs don't necessarily see stable housing and the ability to function as an outcome that they are responsible for. And likewise, incarceration programs are not charged with making sure that the people who exit those programs are prepared to succeed and survive. And so it just becomes some other institution, perhaps some other jurisdiction's responsibility.
Right, but this is the thing that we've seen. The Personal Genome Project has figured out how to deal with this around genetic data, where instead of going through a bunch of different surveys where your genes keep getting sequenced and whatever else, and then it lives with that institution, and even if you're the person whose genetic sequence it is, you have to request permission in order to see it, let alone anyone else doing research. It's not open data. Instead, they've put that data with the individual it's from, and so they get to decide who has access to it and who doesn't. I'm not saying it's a one-for-one equation. I'm just saying by placing that data with the individual that it's from, they can both act on it more rationally and with better clarity, and also carry it with them into other spaces to establish trends in their own lives.
Willow, I wanted to add something to what you just said, which is we track cars and traffic flow better than we track people and need flow. And it's funny because we have cell phones that are with us an awful lot of the time. To your knowledge, has anyone created a system of apps or whatever so that with permission, the person carrying the phone is addressable and has the ability to report on systems breakdowns from their point of view?
There is such a system actually.
There is?
Apple has a system where you can share data. One has to create the app so that the sharing will happen. But they do have the ability to set that up.
See also the NSA. Right, this is why this is problematic, is because when we talk about tracking other people for their own good, who are we to determine, like, it's okay if someone has said, I'm in a really tight spot and I do need service.
That's why I said voluntary. That's why I said voluntary. I agree with you. There's a program called WAZE, W-A-Z-E, where people report voluntarily on traffic that they sense, including speed traps. It's just, they do it. They sign up, they say, I want to be a part of this. They can turn it on or off. It's interesting that Google has that, and we don't have it for greater human issues. It's just,
It's a privacy thing.
no, but I'm saying that people can say they want to do it the same way they opt into Waze, right? This is giving people the chance to have a say about the environment and the system they're living in, right? And I think that's an interesting question. I'm sorry, I was just building on that.
But there's a real context for that, which is fellow drivers and certain routes. And so there's a whole lot of choice involved in that. That's and inbuilt privacy also if you're not hacked. And that's if you're talking about the issues around homelessness and what you need. It's a different level of conversation, and it's very much a crisis situation, even if it's a chronic crisis, in which boundaries have been totally violated, and there's no way to reestablish the boundaries. That they have to be. The homeless person is obligated to relearn boundaries that don't exist. And it's a very tough job.
It's a greater social issue. There are a lot of people who don't know what boundaries exist now.
Well, I mean, tracking cars is a lot easier than tracking the movement of homeless people.
But also articulating what you need is not.
It's such a vital conversation to have. I just wanted to say it's such a vital conversation. There are many people who give away their digital rights, the information, they make themselves hackable. They are rich, they are poor, they are all over the place. There's very poor understanding of how
part
the
of
system
the question becomes, one model is that by collecting data, one can understand better what is going on. And that serves as a basis for policy choices. Another model is to create organizations that are able to respond to the information that is available at the time and location where it becomes available. There's still need for somewhere in the system for the information, because otherwise one cannot evaluate whether or not interventions that are happening are helping or not helping. So the idea that information will not be present is not possible, but the nature of where the information goes and where it is available is different, very different.
Let me throw out another kind of model, which is not about individual people at all. But, I mean, a really horrible analogy, but housing and homelessness is kind of like musical chairs where there are many, many, many more people than there are chairs. And we can look at housing vacancy rates and affordability issues across the country, and we can look at the numbers of people that need housing and are homeless or are in incarceration or are in treatment and will not be able to afford the housing, the limited amount of housing that's available. And so that's a very macro model, but it just says homelessness is fundamentally about the ability to afford and sustain housing.
I think one of the points that I would add, though, is that, and this maybe goes back to Mark's point, that often understanding not just states, but transitions is a really key part of understanding how the system works. So if you just document how many beds there are and how many people there are, the discrepancy between the two, it's not necessarily a reflection of the behavior of the system.
Absolutely.
Right, it's that handoff. Or
It's the transitions and where people are going and whether people need or what they need. And so, you know, the individuals that need beds, the individuals that need treatment of this kind or treatment of that kind, or so on. And then the question becomes, how long do they have to wait in order to go from one to the other as part of the dynamic?
So I just have to say something. Not all homeless people have medical conditions, mental health conditions. Homelessness is, in my view, always economic. It's always about a gap between what you can afford and what you make. So I just want to make sure that we're not sort of pathologizing this entire conversation.
Right.
And I would really like to suggest that if we're going to sort of do a map of this stuff, that we need some basic data. I mean, there's really great data out there that says how much it costs to live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Cambridge or Somerville, and what you need to make as an hourly rate.
Joe's not in the room, but Joe has told me that when he asked Somerville for its own data, it was terrible data. They really have very bad understanding of the inventory of 1, 2-bedroom and all that by rental level that actually would be doing a service to help municipalities everywhere start to collect the data well.
Right. And so interestingly, in my mind, I was thinking like we need to understand the homeless inventory. But you're absolutely right. The homeless
It's a matching problem.
Is a subset of the larger
map the system, which is
it's musical
I feel
chairs.
like I'm a little concerned that we're talking about like let's map individuals moving through their space before we understand.
The reason to do the mapping of individuals through space was to understand the geographical nature of homelessness. The topic that came up last time was the issue of the problem with transportation between where people can live and where people can earn a living, even if earn a living means panhandling or whatever it is that is enabling them to eat, or where food is available. The idea was that food availability or money availability may be located in exactly the most high cost areas, i.e. in downtown Boston, and that becomes part of this pattern. So there was an idea that this could be evaluated using that.
They're interesting models. One is hotel management of their inventory. We could take their models and abstract that and plug in new data. So there's the how many spaces are available, because once the bed goes unfilled, it goes unfilled. So they've really got this, maybe the Hilton or whoever it was would partner on this. Another one is transportation. You can do that via the travel services online. I want to go this place. So they've got the ability to move things, logistics, UPS. So this seems to be what's moving, the person and the opportunity, the space. And then what else is moving? The capital, the idea. So it seems like what we've got is the flow of capital, spaces, and opportunities where if people are more aware of them, how much will they self-direct themselves more effectively, and how much can
I guess I just want to inject in here.
Sure.
There's this whole system thinking that HUD-funded organizations are mandated to do, and the whole idea is like, let's move from
programmatic
level thinking
yeah.
to system level.
And are you saying that's an opportunity?
I'm saying that if we think about individuals and we think about the organizations where they are, and we think about individual handoffs, then somehow we are orthogonal to what's really driving everybody crazy in communities right now, which is figuring out how to work together. And so we really have to focus. We have a lot of data to look at, and we have a lot of regulation to look at.
I love what you said. So it's orthogonal, which means there are sideways organizations that could partner for a whole wraparound approach. But then HUD and others do need some sort of behavior. It might be moving patterns, but they need something that connects the grassroots and the individuals to a level that they can, it's like a dashboard of these people. And so they are trying.
I sort of think they have it. I think they sort
Well,
of
the economics people think of macro and microeconomics, but still not predicting the economy. There's still a gap in there somewhere.
So I guess that we were talking about social fabric and connections, and there's was it, I forget who it was it Adam Smith who thought that where there's demand for labor, people will migrate across the country to North Dakota, and people will go to the south to a car plant in Tennessee, and oblivious to everything else in their lives. It doesn't work like that.
Right.
We are not going to have lots of people from Boston moving to New Bedford because housing is cheaper there, or to Chicopee, and so the people have connections. There is a social fabric, and that fabric is often rended when they become homeless. It's often rended when they're incarcerated or when something else goes wrong. But that doesn't mean that people aren't trying to sustain that fabric and to look at movement in a very, well, here's where it's cheaper to get food, and here's where it's cheaper to get housing, and here's where you are, and here's where the jobs are, as if people will follow that algorithmically, I think loses the human element of all of this.
Absolutely.
I actually read a really interesting sort of debate about Seattle, actually, which has, of course, a huge homeless problem. I mean, I've heard that Seattle has, per capita, just as big a problem with homelessness as New York City, or I don't know if this is true or not, but I mean per capita, because obviously Seattle's a smaller city. But anyway, it was, I saw this on PBS, and apparently in Seattle, they have so many homeless people because there are so many programs for them. Yeah. And of course, if you want to, I mean, really, it's ironic.
The incentives are really intense when
Yeah.
you start. And this is a whole other thing to map.
And that
interorganizational dynamics.
This is what unintended consequences is what we do.
Actually, they
call
call
it the unintended consequence of a beautiful climate.
Right,
is that people,
on the beach in Honolulu.
But it's just, but no, it's not so much that. It's just like, you have great, I mean, of course, any homeless person is going to be like, hey, Seattle, that's the place to be, because they have great social programs.
So the term for this is perverse incentives.
Is there anything,
There's
anything that we can identify as concrete next steps to do in this space of discussion? Maybe we can go around.
Yeah. Well, I'm just curious about you talking about, what is it, rapid rehousing? What is that? Is that rapid rehousing?
It's a model of care
Instead of waiting forever until someone qualifies in 10 different ways.
It says if you qualify as homeless, whether you're in a shelter or you're just like presenting as that moment you were homeless, we're going to seek to put you into your own apartment and give you some money on a time limited basis. Sometimes it's 3 months, it can be up to 18 months sometimes, and hopefully bring to you and help you gain access to community resources that are going to help you really stabilize. And the point is, and for you guys who experience, with lived experiences,
Yes.
you know a lot of people who, with a little bit of intervention, they were fine. The vast majority of homeless people are seen once and never again. And it's like, okay, what happened? We gave them something and they got back into their fabric. So there's a lot to be curious about there too. And then
That's the marginal on the other side, right? That's the ones who are-
But all they needed was, you know, really like
enough money.
18 months of subsidized housing. And there are many people who can do it.
And there are many people who are never seen again. There are many
Yeah.
people who are in a shelter for 5 days. Families that you never see again.
You know, I heard
There are
I've seen
many.
many cases like that.
Yeah.
Families, individuals.
Yeah.
I heard Studs Strickle talk about that too. You know, and he did once that he
People
said
are resilient.
that it's actually interesting. He went and lived in a homeless shelter for like 6 months, and first he did the male shelters, then he did the female shelters, and he said that like women in a female homeless shelter are homeless for a very, very short period because they know they have kids and they know that they have to do something for their kids. And he said, so they got, you know, the dress on and they went to work as secretaries and they went to work as typists. And he said, and that was how they were able to earn enough money to get out of the shelter. But he said, men, on the other hand, you know, men didn't have that onus on them. They didn't have that impetus. And that's why the men that Studs Strickle saw in the shelters were homeless for a whole lot longer.
You know, I guess one of the things that, and I don't know your name.
Yenir.
Yenir. Mentioned was the social competence issue. There are many fewer opportunities to make money with limited skills now than there were in Studs Strickle's day, both for men and women. One of the things that happens sadly, especially around young people, is involvement in sexual services as a way of making money to survive, or trading that as a way of surviving.
Human trafficking.
Whether
On a
it's
personal level.
right? So, but I think we have to be real. You know, yes, Judy is right about the large number of people, large majority of data identified people who are in shelters are there for shorter amounts of time. Now, the question I always ask is whether there's good enough ability in the algorithms that actually match people, because there are a lot of people who really don't want to share personal data when they enter the system.
Sure.
There are a lot of people who want to stay below the radar, and I suspect that there are lots of misidentification of people, so that we don't really understand how long all those people are in the system and whether they are moving around to different communities which have different data systems. But that notwithstanding that, there still are a lot of people who are in the system a short amount of time. And they're homeless because maybe they got thrown out of the house for being drunk, or maybe whatever.
Or car repair, put them over the edge.
Or car repair put them over the edge.
Or surgery.
Or surgery. But there also are also.
Let's go. I know we have to quit. Why don't we go around and just in a few sentences say the thing that you think can be done as
For
a next
our
step.
work to move
For next
forward.
step.
Yeah.
You know, what can we, not
a concrete next step.
Concrete next step. Why don't you go ahead?
Okay, well, I think, you know, Habitat for Humanity is probably the great, you know, model that we could use, because, you know, from what I understand, you know, they really do have a way, because like when you make somebody, you know, earn it, when you make somebody invest in it, then it
So we
means
should
so
look
much
at
more.
models for
Yeah.
self-generating investment of participants.
And you know, and the other
Somebody writing anything down, because I am not.
Could you take notes on this? I apologize.
So yes.
Well, are you still there
So
too?
Habitat for
Just
Humanity
asking.
is great. And there's as a model, yeah, they really are. And there's another, a friend of mine also talked about, her friend is having a GoFundMe campaign for you know, tiny houses, the micro house movement. And apparently this her friend from high school now has raised $28,000 in 1 month on GoFundMe because it's, you know, getting homeless into the micro houses. You know?
Okay, good.
So
Go
So
ahead.
can you put down Habitat
Habitat was the first one.
So, yeah,
All right.
habitat for humanity, yeah. It's making people earn it, making them feel that they own it and that they worked on it and they deserve it.
Okay, I'm gonna suggest that I don't know if you guys have like graduate students or undergraduate students. I think we need a fairly serious scan of the data that exists, of the economics of homelessness, the institutions that touch homeless people, the institutions that touch people. I think we need a real grounding in the data. And
A meta study, right?
really, just like a baseline.
No, I mean the meta study is the review of all, a lit review, but at that level.
We need to understand the context in which people are experiencing this, and then we come back together and we say what's missing and what's gone and where are we not getting that interactive stuff. So.
Good.
So did I say this right? Identify data models?
No.
Gather
the data.
Gather existing data.
System data. Gather existing system data.
I would say gather existing data.
Yeah.
Which means curating the existing data, right?
Right.
Taking all this in and making some sense of it.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
And on that note, I'm gonna go. I'm sorry, I'm off to vacation.
Where?
I'm going to New York. My daughter is,
Performing or something?
she wrote a play that is being put on
Congratulations.
off-Broadway. I am
Enjoy.
the proud mama.
How far off Broadway? You gonna be in Syracuse, or are you gonna just?
You're in the 4th Street Theater.
Oh, lovely.
Enjoy.
Afterwards,
So-
you can go out and play basketball at the 4th Street
That's it.
basketball court.
That's really unlikely, but thank you.
You're welcome.
So I gave somebody my card. I would
Me.
like to stay
I have it.
involved, and
And you.
thank you.
Oh, why don't you, if you have an extra card, why don't you, I'll give it to Sam.
Okay. Thanks. And
When
it's
are you-
lovely to see you.
When are you back, and when would you like to have side coffees? Seriously.
Next week.
Okay.
I'm back on.
Great.
Tell your daughter we said, break a leg.
And she'll say, who are these people? What?
Just don't say Macbeth once you walk in the theater.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Nice to meet you.
Your turn.
So I would agree with Judy, and I think that she and I could certainly help you identify some of the systems and some of the data that exists and some of the data that's missing and some of the challenges in that data.
So like, yeah, basically gathering, yes. Gathering.
Okay, add expert interactions.
How do I say that?
Put yourselves down as the experts.
Oh yeah, they are the expert panel. It's an expert system of experts.
Okay, Mark, I think you're next.
I'd like to be the wild card as always and just see what comes out of this, but one specific thing I don't think we've talked about enough is the breakdown of the big systems players. For example, the food stamp program. There's no shortage of articles about how bureaucracies are breaking down, and when it's a vulnerable population, it's a hot mess. So I'd like to do my quick review of that and see if there's a there that's addressable.
I'm not sure how to write that down.
Just write
Support.
review large government program.
Thank you.
That's it.
Thank you. That's why he's the president.
That's right.
Go ahead. What would be
Sean, pick something.
concrete? Doesn't have to be in this topic. What would be
Right.
one thing that you think
What do you
could
think
be
of
done?
breakdowns?
What would you like to do?
Yeah, where are the
What would
breakdowns
you
that
like
you
to do?
see? Or the,
What action can you take to make something?
just think of the life you've lived, man.
Just better, well, given my experience being homeless, better interaction between the people who offer programs and services to the homeless. Better interaction. Those who are at the top offering programs and services. Just interacting better.
Having them interact better with each other,
Yes,
or interact better with the homeless, or both.
Both actually. Interact better with each other and interact better with the homeless.
It's
Yes.
the handoffs.
Exactly,
As well as
yes.
So could we say among providers and between providers and the homeless?
Yes. That's it.
and between providers, right? So that there's a smooth
It's
handoff
among providers
among providers.
and between
Actually, it's all relationships. Everything we're talking about is relationship tracking.
Not as
providers
focused,
and
but that's not
homeless.
All right, and I think you're next. What is your one item, action item?
Well, I want to know if you do all this data work, I want to know what these institutions are doing. I want to know what they're actually doing. And very often data doesn't tell you what they're doing.
I think that that's extremely important statement. I think an understanding of
Proof's got to be in the pudding.
that's right.
What's
so
the
point
process
is that the
inside?
thing that you want is not data the way they might choose to give it, but information that actually explains what it is that is being accomplished.
How well is their machine working?
Well, what are they
No, no.
trying to do? Is
How well is not the right statement, is what it is that they are doing.
Oh, what their intentions are.
No,
No?
no.
No.
What happens as a result of their actions?
Oh, the outcomes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's marvelous. There's not much follow through in that area at all.
Okay. I think this is good. I'm gonna go call in the other group.
I gotta run too.
Way over time.
Yes.
And hopefully, and if you can stay just for a few minutes to do a readout for the group.
Okay.
Let's all get together and finalize.
I'm going to do this. And so for the record, the board is on the video.
Okay.
Okay. Hold on. Somebody tell me when I've got the whole board. Is the whole board on the video now? Sam? Sam.
It's hard to read though.
Okay, well then I'll go up close.
Not great handwriting.
No, I'm
sorry
getting
about
close so
that.
that we can do parts of it.
Okay.
And this is 5.
I'm doing this for posterity.
All right. All right. So let's do, Sam, why did you do a quick closeout?
Good wrap up, yes.
And then how we can follow through independently when we're not in this room eating pizza.
Right. Well, the main way to follow up independently is to organize, to help revise the notes that we've been taking. And at least for our group, we had a short list of 4 or 5 groups to get in touch with across Boston. Does someone from our group want to give a quick recap?
You take it, you knew what we were talking about more than we did.
So
That's why he's the boss.
That's right.
we talked a little bit about some specific work actions people had taken in their communities. Arnon reached out to his housing complex to see if they'd be interested in setting aside one of their units for someone who's trying to return to permanent housing. And we talked about people in Cambridge and Somerville and Roxbury who either directly are working on education and job connections, or are working on new affordable housing projects. But we noted that most of the affordable housing is not meant for, it really does not directly affect homelessness. That's 2 stages above. So it may contribute to part of the pipeline, but it's for people making at least $20K a year and have a stable salary. And that the best way to find out what each city is trying to do is to reach out to the aldermen or the councilors. So we put down the names of the Cambridge and Somerville reps who we could contact in the next couple of weeks.
Do they really know about homelessness? I mean,
Yes.
Oh, yeah, you're all the council.
I guess another way is that every city that gets HUD funding has to create something called a consolidated plan, which has to describe all of the players in the city or the jurisdiction that are working on addressing housing, homelessness, economic development, workforce development.
Tapping you was also high on our list.
Tapping you.
yes.
Tapping. We can
All
applaud
right.
too.
Good. Anybody else want to add something from the first group?
We kind of felt that we wanted to focus moving forward on women with children and gay youth. Were 2 kind of overlapping.
Women and children.
What?
Women and children.
Right, women and children.
Oh, yeah. Or women with children.
Well, women,
So now instead of
children
housing
and women
first,
with
we have
children.
women first.
There you go. I like that.
Children are the fastest growing segment of the homeless population. This is well known data. It's not, hidden somewhere.
If we focus on women and children, then we also include the category of various ethnicities and also gay youth as well.
Okay.
For the groups.
I mean, pardon me for being a little thick, but what does being gay have to do with being homeless?
They get thrown out.
They get thrown out.
Oh, they do?
That's why they're homeless.
Yes, they do.
If you're at the edge, you're at the edge.
Yeah, there's a statewide
Not always the
initiative around GLBTQ youth who are a disproportionate member of the homeless and runaway
Wow.
youth community.
Also include mental health issues. That's why the larger group helps us encapsulate all of these.
But what is, I mean, I still, well, I don't know. I mean, if the Bush administration can stop, women in the third world from having abortion, then, federal funds being used for.
All right, I think we want to do our wrap up.
So our group was looking at some data and modeling related questions, and so a couple of things that we were looking at, or that we ended up putting on our list, some of which are about data and modeling and some of which are not, are models for investment in participation of your housing, like, for example, Habitat for Humanity, where you earn your opportunity to be housed, GoFundMe, and micro-housing. On a different note, we talked about scanning, the need for some sort of meta study of the data that's out there about the institutions that touch homelessness and the kinds of data that they collect and systems of data that exist in general, what they include, what they don't include, what kinds of challenges, what about the quality, what questions they answer. Related to that, there was the question of what are these institutions actually doing? What are they trying to do perhaps? What are they accomplishing? What are the byproducts? And then a review of large government programs, and then looking at the interaction between programs, between and among programs that address homelessness, and between those programs and the participants that receive services from them.
One question?
I wanted to add one little thing. We had a very pointed, short, but conversation about security, personal privacy issues around data and all that. And I think we noted that this is a really messy area that's not very well defined for any individuals.
And one of the key questions is that in the process of collecting data, one has to think carefully about where the data is going to go and for what purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So on the one hand, it would be very nice from a research perspective to analyze and understand all the data. On the other hand, from a point of view of operation of the system, it may be better to try to figure out ways that the data can remain local and the response can be local.
Exactly.
Any other comments?
One of the features of that is that both Somerville and Cambridge are wonderful, good data sources because they live in tiny cities and they're both undergoing substantial planning, so that it's possible to get much more data from those two than you're going to get from cities of comparable size in almost any place else.
Right. Anything else that someone wants to add? Because we're kind of way over time. I'm appreciative that people have commented.
We thought that perhaps the next time we could wear name tags so that everyone could be addressed by name instead of, I can't remember your name.
Sounds like it's a great idea.
Name tags is great.
Yeah, I like that.
And along the lines of systems, I'd like to think about places that are doing sideways research already with data about conditions, civic conditions, and other things. And so when we talked about our review, I think we can have a pool of people to connect with who may be connected with other people, connected with other things like this.
I apologize. I have to run. I'm about 15 minutes late already.
Thank you.
But thank you so much. It was wonderful.
When's the next? What are the next?
So for people whose addresses we don't have,
Right,
please sign up. For those who are still checking in online, thank you for joining us.
And let me just,
We'll end our broadcast here.
I just want to say just two